Alright, let's put some brakes on the back of your R1. You know you've needed brakes for a while and you wanted to upgrade the brakes that are currently on it. So these are the factory Nissan that come with the Yamaha. Um, so what we do is we take a straight slot screwdriver and we remove this little cover that's going to show us a Allen head, hex head bolt. So we're going to take our hex tool and we're going to break that little shaft free in there, and we're going to spin it out. So this shaft is what your brake pads slide on. When you hit the brake pedal, your brake pads slide closed on this little shaft. So there we go, we got it out, and then your brake pads just drop right out of there. So these brake pads actually look pretty good. They're not even half worn out yet. But the owner of this bike, he wanted newer pads. Compounds are a little bit better. I'm a firm believer that any bike you ride, if you put EBC HH pads on it, that bike is going to just handle amazing when it comes to stopping. So here's a brand new set of EBC HH. A set for pretty much any bike is typically under $35. I am going to put the little heat shield back onto these. This cover that I just clipped onto the new brake pads, not only does it protect the pad from the heat, but it also, if there's any squeal, it'll stop the brake pads from squealing. Typically when I make a change like that, if the manufacturer puts those on the brake pads, then I assume that the manufacturer wants those on the brake pads, so I put them back on. Now I have a piece of steel wool and I'm cleaning up the shaft which your brake pads slide on. So don't put this back into the bike if it's corroded. Go ahead, and now's the great time to polish up this shaft. You do want your brake pads to slide freely on this rod. So this is the best way to do it right here. Steel wool is something you should always keep in your toolbox. You always need it to clean up stuff on a bike. So we just want to make sure that everything inside the caliper looks pretty good. These retaining clips, what you can see easily are the springs that make the brake pad kind of spring into place, and then what you can't see is a little clip on the caliper that the brake pad kind of like locks into on the front part of the brake pad, the brake caliper, I'm sorry. So we put the first one in, we put the second one in, you can see it kind of just clips in there, and then we need to flip the caliper back over and stick our shaft in, and then we take our Allen wrench and we screw this shaft into the caliper. Now don't go all balls out overboard on this one. Tighten that shaft so it's good and tight and in there snug, and then don't forget to put that cover back on. I'm not sure why I cut out the clip where it shows me putting that cover back on there. And then you're ready to go. And then when you reinstall your rear wheel after a tire change, then you just slide your caliper with your new pads in. So now we're going to drain out the reservoir. You can see in the video that the .4 that's in this reservoir is absolutely the wrong color. Brake fluid should never be dark brown. So it should always be a golden honey color. This is just way too dark. It's unacceptable. You should never let your bike get this color. This bike is a 2007 So I'm going to assume that this brake fluid is original. That puts it right at 13 years old. So it's more than past time that this fluid should have come out of the bike. So I'm going to remove the cap off the reservoir, and I use a Mighty Vac. It's one of the best tools that I have in my box, and I have 4 or 5 of them that I use mainly for brakes. But I'm going to take my Mighty Vac and I'm going to pull out the brake fluid that's in that reservoir, and you can see it's the wrong color. And then I'm going to take an 8mm wrench to the caliper. I took off the rubber cover for the caliper bleeder nipple. You want to make sure that cover is always on there. If your bike doesn't have a cover on that bleeder valve, you need to run to the auto parts store and get a cover. It is very important that you keep that hole covered up and clean. It'll help you out in the future when it comes to changing brake fluids and servicing your brake components. So I'm just pulling air through, so we went ahead and finish that. As you can tell, it's the wrong color. I want to clean out any of that dark colored brake fluid out of the reservoir. And you can see that the dirty brake fluid has discolored the inside of the reservoir. If you change out your brake fluid every couple years, your reservoir won't get discolored like this one is. It'll stay that plasticky white looking color, and then when you add your brake fluid, it'll let the brake fluid glow through yellow. So I cleaned up the diaphragm that goes in the top of the reservoir cover. So now I'm going to remove the brake line itself. So on the Yamaha, it's just a 6mm hex head banjo bolt. So I'm going to do the high one first. That'll just allow me to swing this hose out of the way so I don't drip brake fluid on the bike. If you drip any brake fluid on your motorcycle, the best time to clean that brake fluid up is when you spill it. As soon as you spill it, you get a drop anywhere on the bike, you make sure you get that brake fluid off the bike, off any painted surfaces, or you will regret it tomorrow. So now I'm breaking through the banjo bolt on the rear caliper. This is a lot easier to do while the caliper is mounted to the motorcycle. When you're putting on the new banjo bolt, you have to get that nut, that bolt, fairly tight. You can't do that if you're holding the caliper in your hand. So I'm just wiping it down, wiping it clean, making sure there's no brake fluid anywhere on the bike. Brake fluid is very toxic. It will destroy paint. It's as bad as getting acid on the bodywork. It's just, all I can say is brake fluid's bad. Don't spill it. Don't get it anywhere. So here's our new Galfer braided brake line. You can tell by the banjo ends how it's supposed to mount up to the bike. It pretty much mounts up the way that the OEM dot brake line came off of the bike. And then these are your new crush washers and your new banjo bolts. One thing I like about the Galfer kit is Galfer always adds extra copper crush washers. So if you make a mistake or your system's leaking when you're done, you can always pull that banjo bolt off and put new crush washers in its place. So you put one crush washer onto the banjo bolt, you put the banjo bolt through the banjo, and then you put the other crush washer on the banjo bolt and then screw it into either the caliper or the master cylinder. Right now we're screwing it into the caliper, and just get it finger tight. That way that hose has some wiggle room so we don't have to finagle the front. Braided brake lines, installing them is absolutely not like installing DOT lines. DOT lines flex a lot more than the braided lines do. So just install everything finger tight, and then once you got everything in place and it looks good the way you like it, then go ahead and tighten down your banjo bolts after that. Braided brake lines is one of the best performance modifications you can do to your bike. The R1 already accelerates extremely quick, so having a braking system which stops the bike adequately is a must for a bike with this much power. So there are torque specs on what you should be doing this banjo bolt to. My thought is you torque it down so it's tight. Don't over tighten it though. I don't want to throw out a guess of what the torque specifications are, but if you have a 14 millimeter combination wrench in your hand, it should be pretty difficult for you to over tighten these bolts, but just know you can over tighten them, and don't try to, because this could be really bad if you over tighten it. So now we're going to put new fluid in the system. So you want to put whatever fluid in the system that is on the cap that came off your reservoir. For this cap it says .4 on the top, so we're going to put .4 back into the reservoir. If you don't have a fresh bottle of brake fluid, typically when you work on your brake system you should always open a fresh container of brake fluid. I go through quite a bit of brake fluid, so I never have a container that sits on the shelf longer than a month without being used. So that's why you saw that this container was already open, and I'm going to finish it off in this project, and the little bit that's left in the container I'm just going to send off to recycling. But right now I'm pulling the new fluid through the system, and this is pulling new fluid and all the air out of the system, and then we just tighten down that bleeder valve. And right now we have pretty decent brakes, so if you wanted to spin the wheel like I will, the brake system is working, so it's doing pretty good, what I would expect out of an R1 system. I'm going to top off the reservoir one more time, and I want to make sure that there's no air in the master. If there were air with me pumping on the brake pedal, little air bubbles would come up into the reservoir, but there's no air left in there. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pull some more of this .4 through the system, just to make sure that I get all the air and as much of that old fluid flushed out of the system as I can. So this too, when you're working on your R1, this also is a very easy job to do, as you can see. Again, I spilled a little bit of .4 on the caliper, so I want to make sure that I clean that up as soon as I spill it. My reservoir, I need to top it off. Since I put new brake pads on the bike, I know that I can top this off to the full level, and once I start using the brakes and the brake pads start to wear away, that's when you'll start seeing your fluid level go down. So I pop the reservoir back into place. Now this screw is the screw that holds the reservoir onto the bike. Very important. We want to make sure that this reservoir is solidly attached to the bike. And at this point we are pretty much done with changing out the rear brakes on our 2007-2008 Yamaha R1. We do need to put the little cover, the little rubber cover, back onto the rear bleeder valve. This is very important for your safety and to make ease of changing and bleeding the fluid in the future easier on you. So the brakes look pretty good. So thanks for watching my video. Please watch some of my other ones.